He believed the full emancipation of women would mean the end of an ideal. After all, he concluded, nature has destined women, through beauty, charm, and sweetness, for something else.
There's a lot of emphasis been put on Freud's diminishing women by talking about penis envy. Freud was wrong about women in a number of ways, and one aspect of his being wrong was that he saw mothers as entirely benign. Otto Rank said that, essentially that Freud knew no mother other than the good mother. He was afraid to say anything critical because of his own anxieties around his own mother, and that whenever he approached that subject, he veered off.
Modern psychoanalysts believe that little girls develop a sense of femininity very early in childhood. If a woman feels persistent inferiority to men, development has gone profoundly wrong.
Freud himself was dissatisfied with his theory of female sexuality, and analysts ever since his time have critiqued it and revised it. In part, Freud has been misinterpreted. For example, when he talked about penis envy and feelings of inferiority in women, he wasn't saying that women should feel that way. He was saying that they often did.
Before Freud, most people believed in conscious will alone. Freud forced us to recognize the unknown power of our unconscious. Like most revolutionaries, he has been both damned and praised.
Freud's self-image was one of the conquistador, that here is this warrior against repressive forces who would set us all free and would allow us to fulfill the human potential, even though he had some doubts whether we could really do that.
He's never in any doubt that one day he's going to arrive. This is the Sigmund Freud who, in 1896, with his seduction theory, proclaimed to his medical colleagues that he had discovered no less than the source of the Nile of neuropathology. That's a quote. This is the same Sigmund Freud who, a decade later, or thereabouts, would claim to have deciphered the, quote, riddle of the Sphinx in terms of his theory of infantile sexuality. This is quite a conceit.
By 1897, Freud considered his seduction theory, the assumption that all neuroses are caused by childhood sexual abuse, invalid. He concluded that many patients who cited abuse had no more than active imaginations, or that Freud himself had encouraged false confessions. Recently, there have been a wave of accusations of sexual abuse from people who suddenly remember what they allegedly repressed years ago. Although Freud withdrew his seduction theory and would have regarded most of these charges with skepticism, his theory of repression and the unconscious is being used, most Freudians would say misused, to assert their authenticity.
Among certain feminist circles, it's held that he changed his mind about what was called the seduction theory, i.e. that many of his patients actually had been sexually abused, because of concerns about his career and his reputation, that it was a piece of intellectual dishonesty on his part. This reading simply isn't true. Freud's discovery of infantile sexual fantasies was one of his most important discoveries, and he was very clear about this. And at the same time, he was convinced that a certain small number of children had been sexually abused, and he never gave up the idea that certain neuroses were caused by that.
The study of Freud is sometimes considered more of a religion than a science, and yet when measured against scientific findings, at least some of Freud's theories hold true. Everybody dreams, probably. Although many of us forget them, during a normal night's sleep we dream for about 1/5 of the time. Our most vivid dreams come to us during REM, rapid eye movement sleep. They can be as intense and emotional as real-life experiences. At the Bethesda Sleep Disorder Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, experiments on dreams and sleep are conducted almost daily.
He's had a scene change. You know, like he's gone from one room to another, or the whole theme and place of the dream has changed. I think
patients are attached to electrodes which measure various impulses, including REM. EEG readings, which record the electrical activity of the brain, show that these periods of rapid eye movement correspond with particular brain rhythms.
The notion that REM sleep, the physiology, has somehow destroyed, altered, or made Freud untenable, I think we too quickly, my colleagues, even my psychoanalytic colleagues, jump much too quickly to the notion that Freudian theory is somehow put aside by the laboratory work.
Freud theorized that dream function helps keep us asleep. REM theory supports this idea. The more REM we have, the more we dream. Since the most REM happens in the second half of the night when we're more likely to wake up, that is also when most dreams occur, which with their censoring keep us asleep.
I dreamt I was high up in an apartment building watching a volcano erupt when suddenly I heard a terrible noise, and I looked out and saw a huge tidal wave coming. And at that moment I suddenly thought, my children, and I turned around and saw each of my 3 children being swept out of the building. The next moment I was in the water swimming after them, and I was trying to find them, and I was crying and crying in the water. Then I was on dry land looking for them, and I saw all these dead people lying around. And first I found my eldest daughter, and she was wet, but she was alive. Then my middle daughter, and I knew for sure my youngest daughter was dead. And sure enough, I saw her lying out among all these other people, and she was dead. And I was crying and crying, and I woke up.
The next giant of dream interpretation was Carl Jung. At first an ardent disciple of Freud. Although Jung and Freud did not formally part ways until 1913, they had conflicting opinions from the start. Jung agreed with Freud that the unconscious plays an important role in neurosis. He also believed dreams dramatically influence the psyche. But Jung's notion of the collective unconscious, the theory that we are shaped by a common memory of myths and images, was a strong departure from Freud's theories. Jung also rejected Freud's insistence that life energy is primarily sexual. Jung converted many to his new form of therapy, but his approach to psychology owed much to the father of psychoanalysis.
The history of modern psychotherapy begins with Freud, and a historical overview has to include him. But I think there was a sense that when I trained, that Freud was almost everything, and to the extent that he wasn't everything, there was a sort of hub-and-spoke arrangement where Freud was at the center and everything else was some variant of Freud or comment on Freud. Whereas I'd say now, even within psychotherapy, Freud has become one among many. Of course, psychoanalysis is still the best, most complexly elaborated theory of the human mind.
Freud wrote prolifically after the interpretation of dreams was published. His later volumes included a study of the individual's relationship to society, a psychoanalytic account of Moses and the Jews, and more detailed work on the ego and the id. By 1926, Freud was an internationally known psychiatrist. Anna Freud followed her father's footsteps into psychoanalysis, providing Freud with a collaborator and companion until the end of his life. From 1923, Freud suffered from cancer of the jaw and palate, which required repeated surgery and radiation treatment. For the next 15 years until his death, Freud was never without complaint, at times enduring terrible pain. In 1933, the rise of the Third Reich infiltrated Freud's life. Because Freud was a Jew with rebellious ideas, psychoanalysis was blacklisted. Book burning staged by the Nazis consigned Freud's works to the flames. Exit visas from Austria were difficult to